Hello CSAEers. In this episode of CSAE Conquering Content, we're going to be talking about content audits. I'm Steve Trustrum, Manager of Content here at CSAE. So what is a content audit? A content audit is when you basically look at everything involved in your content creation and publication process to see what you have, what you're working with, what you should be working with, and to see how well that is working. So although this is late in the series of Conquering Content episodes, a content audit is really something you should start out with before you really delve into a content strategy. Just because how do you know what you could be doing if you don't know what you have to work with? So one of the things you got to look at is who is producing your content, who's able to help, who on your team is going to be in charge of this. It seems a logical place to start. And what are their skills? Now, in not-for-profits, you quite often find it's not people who have the proper skills in place to be content producers and to oversee your content strategy. You may have a content committee, you may have a content volunteer, but it's rare that a not-for-profit has a paid staff member who that's their skill set, that's such as myself, a content manager. It's not very common. Typically, it's someone who wears many hats, is perhaps in marketing, or otherwise they're a writer. Or, quite often it's just, do you know a lot about social media? Oh, you do? You have your own blog? Okay, guess what? You're going to be doing your content for us. Content committees are often people who are there because they're interested in it, and not necessarily because they actually have the training and skills in place. Now, that's not a bad thing necessarily. Like, it's great if you have those skills in place, but these are things that can be learned. They can be researched. But you can only ever develop those skills as well as you have to the point where you're meeting the capacity for the tools and the resources you have in place. So it's important to know that. So once you know who is in place, you also know what you have to look for to fill any gaps. So even if you've got someone who is skilled and very knowledgeable in content production and content strategy, you are probably going to need content contributors. These are people who don't necessarily have to have the experience and skill sets with content production. This is what your person who's on your content committee or whatever is in place to do. They're going to push and design the processes for content production. The content contributors are just going to help with the content, with providing the content. So they're subject matter experts in their particular fields and the topics they're going to be dealing with and so forth. So they need direction from your content team. Now, beyond the people, what are your online resources? What is your website set up as, and what other resources do you have in terms of social media? What channels are available? Do you have Facebook? Are you on Twitter? Do you have Instagram for output of, because you have a high photo or video output? So that sort of thing. Do you have a LinkedIn profile? Do you run LinkedIn groups? These are the kind of things that you need to know going in, and hopefully they've been in process long enough that you've developed, or they've been out there long enough that you've got followers on them, you've got an audience in those social media. If not, then part of your content audit is figuring out how to expand those audience, how to get followers. Beyond that, you also have to look at how is your website constructed? How do you interact with it? How is content produced through it? So what is your content management system, or CMS? Popular ones are WordPress, CSAE uses DNN, there's Drupal, there's any number of them. Gone are the days where businesses hand-coded this stuff using Dreamweaver or the like. So CMSs basically help you pre-package a website that you then fine-tune. You put your templates together, you put a skin on it, and you put plugins in to get the functionality you want. So plugins include things that let you add additional content to it. There's blog plugins, there's monetization plugins such as banner ads, storefronts. All those things are plugins. They plug into your CMS and allow you to put content on the website. And this is all stuff that happens on the back end. So far as what's happening in front of your audience, it should all be seamless, and they shouldn't, there's no reason for them to know what your CMS is. But your CMS affects your content production process by how easy it is to use, but also the level of functionality it gives you. How many options does it let you do? .NET Nuke, for example, which is what CSAE uses, as I said, has problems that a lot of the plugins aren't designed for content users, I've noticed. So for example, the blog that we use, it does the blog plugin, it doesn't allow you to put in customized alt tags for your banner images. Now that might seem like a minor thing in the grand scheme of things, but for SEO purposes, one of the touchstones for SEO is putting keywords in your alt tags for your images. So that means if I want to have that alt tag, I've got to add an extra image to the blog and hand code in the alt tags within the code of the blog itself. So these are the sort of problems that you might not consider when you're choosing the CMS for your website, but once you really delve into the particulars of content strategy and content production, they become important. So you need to audit your website CMS to see what it does and what it does not do. So you may have to change plugins if you find that what you're currently working with doesn't get the job done. But if you really want to optimize your content process, do an audit of your website. You also want to look into any third-party tools that you're using. So this could be things like Hootsuite, which help you organize your social media posting and the like. What do you have in line for that? What are you using as a content calendar so that your entire team can coordinate your content production and schedule it for a release during optimal times, but also that people just know when things are due. So for something like an organization like CSAE, we have a message board that we use, a private message board, so only content contributors and our network executives can go in and see what's going on. It gives them the opportunity to see what blogs are coming out so that they can see if they want to coordinate something on a local level with us. And of course, part of that is experimenting, finding out what works for your team. We also use Basecamp, for example. So there's a number of tools that you can look into, and don't feel that you have to go like full bore right out of the gate. You don't think that the most expensive is the best. You can find a lot of free tools that'll get the job done until you kind of get your process in place and you start to refine it. And then you're like, okay, we've got the foundation, now we need to get more. We need to squeeze more efficiency and effectiveness out of our process. Now, you also want to look at your blog. If your organization is looking at a content strategy and it doesn't have a blog, well, that's something you just have to rectify. A blog is the easiest, most consistent way to produce content because, as I've mentioned in previous videos about social media, you do not want to tell your story and release your information through social media, for example. You want your social media to be the teaser that pulls to the content on your website. If you're releasing articles directly onto Facebook or whatever, then people are reading it on Facebook. They have no reason to come visit your website. So a blog is a great way to release content on a regular basis and then have social media pull towards that blog. And then the blog has a call to action that pulls deeper into your website to a more direct thing, be it monetization, registration, membership, whatever. So you need to see if you have a blog running, you need to see if your blog is adequate. So in other words, it's going to allow you to do these SEO implementation, as well as I mentioned, customize your blog, customize the URL, the permalink, so that you don't want a blog that releases like article/1246 that numerically identifies your blog. You want something that allows you to adjust the URL so that your keywords can go into the web address itself instead of just some random thing. You have to be able to customize that too, so that a lot of blogs will look at what your blog's title is and extract that and use it as the URL, but you have a lot of what's called stop words, things like to, and, or, but. These are stop words. They're necessary for reading a title and understanding it, but when you extract that title into the URL, the and, the but, the or, the to, all that stuff is just unnecessary. Search engines, when they index your URL, just dump it. They get rid of it. So it's just in the way. So it's very important that you be able to clean that stuff out manually instead of just letting it automatically be derived from your title and off you go. Okay. You also want to be able to modify your URL structure in your website for other reasons, which I'll explain, And this is part of your website audit. You want to go through the website and look how your web pages are being created by your CMS and see if there's problems with it. And this is one of the big issues we have at CSAE, admittedly, is that the database structure that we use to create events, we populate it in the database interface, and then it gets pushed through to the website automatically. Okay, so we have a framework on the website that goes into the database and builds the events out of that automatically, instead of having to go onto the website and hand code every event as it comes out, or every book, for example. Our bookstore works the same way. So this is all done in a database and pulled out. Makes sense. But the problem is that the particular plugins that we use are really bad for extracting URLs out of titles. So if you type in a book or you type in the name of an event, and you have spaces in the word in between words, so they make sense because that's how people type. They put spaces between words. Instead of putting a hyphen where those spaces are, it leaves the spaces and instead puts in the code for a space, which is something like %20. So you go to the CSAE websites, you'll see this word %20, word %20, and stuff like that. That's because where the CMS is extracting that URL, it's seeing a space between the words and trying to keep it literal instead of putting a hyphen in. Now, why the hyphen is important is the hyphen in lieu of spaces in a web address is how Google and other search engines recognize spaces without having that %20. It recognizes here is a break between words. Now, some people use underscores when they make URLs or when they name files. And this is important. Don't name files, be it a PDF that someone downloads or an image. Do not put underscores in the names in between words. Use hyphens. Now, the reason why is that a hyphen is, as I said, recognized as a space by search engines. An underscore is not. An underscore is basically like a stop word, like and or to or. The search engine ignores it and just moves on to the next word. So if you're using underscores to separate your words, the search engines do not recognize a space there. Your entire URL will just be one jumbled word. Okay, so that's why it's important to do that. Also, name all of your images something that is relevant. Don't just call it like a short form, IMG-964-26-CSAE. Don't do that. You want to name it what it's relevant. So if it's relevant to a particular book, you would put the book's name in the name of the image. So then when it does show up in an address, those keywords get indexed. So this is the type of thing you have to audit your website to see how your URLs are set up. And if your website has been around for a long time and no thought was put into this, it's just you let the system run as it is. Just let the CMS do what it does and don't correct it, don't customize it, don't modify anything. You're going to find most likely that you have a lot of these sort of problems in your URL structure. Okay, CSAE has a lot of it, and it's all legacy. That's what it's called, legacy problems. It's stuff that's left over, maybe from when this URL structure wasn't important, or the CMS just didn't have the capacity to modify it. Updates allow it, and you've just been going on based on what traditionally your process was without updating it. So you need to audit to find out where this has gone wrong and course correct. Find a way to change it so that your URLs are now keyword friendly. And the reason why you want your URLs to be keyword friendly is so that they index better. The search engines look at the URL, can make sense of what the topic is about, because you can see it in the URL. You can see these keywords here. So it's like, oh, the keywords in there are association technology best practices. That's in the URL. So Google looks at that and goes, oh, this is something that's about association technology best practices. Can't do that if it's, your URL is /article/1246. Okay, or something else like that. It can't do that. So you lose that chance to rank higher in search engine results. So that's why that's important. Now, another thing you have to do when you audit your website is you have to look at how it's structured. You have to look at the code. And why this is important is because aside from how good your server is and how good that internet connection is from your server, wherever your website is hosted, how your site is coded affects load speed. Okay, so you can go to websites, and there's all kinds of tools for it. You don't have to look it up because I don't want to give you the names of any tools here because they change so often, and it could just by the time you watch this video, that tool could be gone. But just look up a tool that'll show you how your website is viewed from your web browser's perspective. So that means not how it appears on the screen, okay? It's how your page is served, how the code is served to the browser, and then the browser interprets it. So that means how does that code in order reach the browser, and how does the browser deal with it? And you can tell that this is not a linear process relative to how your website is viewed. If you've ever been trying to load a website and you'll see that a piece appears here and a piece appears here and it's loading slow, and an image at the bottom appears before the text at the top, and you're like, why is this doing this? That's because this is the order that code is served up to the browser. The stuff here and the stuff here and the picture here is actually here, here, and here in terms of how the code gets served up to the browser. So when you look at code on a website, top to bottom, the stuff that's loading first is closest to the top. So this could be stuff that isn't necessary, like your advertisers. If you have advertisers on your website, your advertisers like to put their code near the top of your code page so that it gets served up first, because they're like, if someone's going to come here and this website takes a long time to load, we want them looking at our ads first and then leaving. Who cares about your content? Look at our ads, look at our ads. So they tend to be coded first. And there's other things that are similarly like that. So what you want to do is you want to go into your code and find stuff that can be deferred. And what that means is stuff that can be loaded afterwards. You can defer it to later. And that has to physically be moved from higher up in your source code to lower. Not everything can be deferred, but you can look at what it does. And so a lot of these tools will tell you what can be deferred and what can be moved. So this is very important to load speed, especially if you've got a lot of stuff that's being pushed through on a website and you want your text to appear first. So while things are loading, people can read your website. So if you've got a lot of stuff before your content comes up, that's not going to happen. All that stuff has to load. It will not move on to the next thing until it has completed that process in order. There's other things you can look at to help with load speed. You can see if you can contact your web host and see if they have optimized your website. So this includes things like gzip. Everybody is familiar with zipped files. Well, there's a similar form of compression that's on your website. There's also what's called minification, and what that is there's tools that look at your code, often plugins and CMSs that will minify your code. And what it does is it compresses it. It takes these big chunks of code and kind of gives it a short form. If it sees things a lot, it gives it a short form, or takes out unnecessary code that just is in there as part of the process, but it's just irrelevant. So these are things that increase your load time. Now another thing is image optimization. And this is something I see, it's a big problem on websites of all sorts. Small businesses, associations, corporations do it. So what happens is, say you've got a publication, an annual publication. So you have your print-ready cover, which you send off to the printer, and you use it for your PDF version as well. So when you have to announce that this new version of your magazine is coming out, and you're like, well, I need an image of the cover for our blog, your image person sends you this print-ready file, and you upload it to your CMS, and you display it as this tiny little box. It's a tiny little image on your page. But the problem is it's print ready. So you've actually got this massive file that's of such high resolution, high definition, that it's meant for printing. But you don't need that, because your image, the image quality online on a web browser is less than a third of what is required minimum for print. Okay, I'm not going to get into specifics, but take my word for it. The quality of the image you need is less than a third of what you need for print. So if you use a print-ready image, the quality you're using is more than triple what is necessary to view it online. And what that means is that the file is bigger. So you're using this massive print-ready image for a tiny little display on your web browser. And it's not because even though you're making the image display smaller, it doesn't mean it loads less of the image. It still has to load this big, massive print-ready image to display a tiny little thing on the browser. So a lot of organizations don't do this. They don't take that print-ready image and process it so that it's smaller and it's more economically optimized for online use. So that's what happens, is that when someone tries to visit your website, all these big, massive image files are being loaded and it slows down load time. So part of your web audit, your content audit, you've got to go and see what images you're using have not been optimized for web use. Now, if you're using Photoshop, there is actually, in the latest version of Photoshop, if you go into export and there's an option for web, and I think it says legacy in parenthesis, that will actually run it through this process in a largely automated way to make it any image web ready. And it lets you save as PNGs, which allow you to have transparencies, or JPEGs. So there's a lot of things that go into optimizing your images, like stripping out the meta information. Again, a little bit technical, but trust me, you need to learn this stuff if you're putting images online, and audit your website to see where this is already a problem so that you can adjust it and fix it. If you have sponsors, for example, chances are when your sponsor comes on board your organization and you ask for an image to display, they're going to contact their graphics department, just say, I need a logo. Probably aren't going to specify why. And the graphics department is going to send them a print-ready copy, or they're just going to send a package. Here's the zip file with every logo. And so they'll be labeled like web, print-ready, whatever. And they'll send it to you, and you're going to grab the one that says, maybe it's the first one, and ones that look best. And the one that looks best is going to be the one that's print-ready because it's a higher resolution. So you have to know how to make web-ready images and how to find them on your website if you want to speed it up. Because what a content audit will find, and auditing your website will find, is how long does your website take to load? And again, there are tools you can go online, Google it, tool for testing website load speed. Do something like that, and it will take you to a site that will let you do it for free. Anything longer than 8 seconds, the chance of someone sticking around for your site to load just drops through the floor. It may seem like, well, why wouldn't if it's important, why wouldn't someone stick around for 8 seconds? Because people get bored easy, and as technology improves, the need to get instant gratification keeps increasing and increasing. So you can't have a website that takes longer than 8 seconds to load, especially if it's a mobile website, because most people will just leave. Now, between 4 and 8 seconds is good. People might still leave because they think it's taking too long, but you've got a good chance of them sticking around. So 4 to 8 seconds is comfortable. Anything faster than 4 seconds is great. That's where you want to be. Faster than 4 seconds, boom, boom, boom. And one of the things you can do for helping to improve your load speed, what people don't really realize is they think, the internet is instantaneous, it's quick. No, it's not. Location actually matters. If your business or your organization is, say your association is regional, you're an Ontario Trade Association, so all of your membership is in Ontario. That's where your audience is. You don't care about people in other provinces. If they want to come look at your content, sure, great, but Ontario is where your meat and potatoes are. But you're hosting your website in the US through GoDaddy or some similar service. The fact that they are geographically distant from you will affect your load time. And a lot of people don't think so, but it does. It takes a while for that information to get to you. And what happens is, say your website's hosted in Texas and your audiences and your association are in Ontario. Your information has to travel through Texas, through all of that infrastructure in the US. And as we know, America has huge, huge infrastructure problems. And that includes its data servicing and telecommunications capabilities. So any slowdown region, any area between Texas and Ontario where the infrastructure for their telecommunications is subpar, that's like a speed bump to your data getting served up. So if you can't relocate locally because you just don't have a service that's up to par, or just it's too much of a hassle, then what you can do is you can look into a content distribution network, a CDN. And what this is it's a local service that basically takes to think of it, they make a copy of your website that is hosted more locally. And so when people go to your website, they're actually going to your CDN, which is then pulling from your hosting service. And when the hosting service has changes made, it tells your CDN, and your CDN makes the changes. So it's like it makes it able to serve the data quicker from a local area. And of course, the only problem is that it can then only update itself as fast as the information can travel from Texas or wherever your website is hosted. So that's one way to look into increasing your web speed. But you really need to audit it to find out what coding problems you have. You need to find out where you can trim things down, how you can improve things, how you can optimize it. The more times your website is looking off-site, the more problems it's going to have, the slower it's going to be. So some websites like to have a Twitter feed, for example. You know, a little box at the bottom that shows your latest tweets or your latest Facebook posts and all that. The problem with that is those tend to be, again, top-loaded, so your website won't display your content until it's actually contacted Twitter, contacted Facebook, and pulled all that information into your website. Now, why is that a problem? Well, what if Twitter or Facebook is slow that day? Your website's load speed, for people who have no interest in your Twitter posts or Facebook posts, their ability to access the website at good speed is limited by how fast Twitter or Facebook is working. And that goes for any number of things. The more stuff you have that's happening off-site but is being pulled through your website, the slower it's going to be, or the greater the chance that it's going to be slow. So you got to think about that. If you want to pull your Twitter feed or your Facebook feed or your YouTube playlists through your website, do it in an area that's not on your homepage, because your homepage is your introduction to your audience. It's how they come to know you. So if your homepage takes a long time to load, that's how they're going to come to think of your website as slow. So pull that up somewhere else. Put them on localized landing pages or something. Be strategic about where you put such external resources onto your website. So again, that's part of your website audit. Find out where you're pulling off-site stuff and how you can better use that to increase your load times. Now, you also, as part of your website or your content audit, you got to look at where you're repeating yourself. So duplicate content decreases relevancy in the eyes of search engines. In other words, they say, sure, you're saying this here, but it's also being said here. Now, whether that's on-site or off-site, it doesn't matter. They look and they say, you are not, this web page here, this one single web page is not the only place I can go to find this exact content and this exact wording. So you're not as relevant as you should be, because it can be found elsewhere. So you split that relevancy with those other sources. So you want to keep your duplicate content to a minimum. And I've discussed the importance of this with reference to the Conquering Content episode on blogs and social media. It's important. So I'm not going to go into it again here, but go back, look at those episodes, and see where I talk about how you cut down on duplicate content with social media and blogs. Now, on-site, this means don't do press releases that are copying and pasting information from your website. And this is a problem I have here at CSAE with people who are producing content, is when they want to do a news release about an event, say, they go and copy the information off of the event page where the registration is and just say, here, post this. This is the news release. It's not a news release. You're just saying, look at this news piece that gives you these details, and then that news piece sends you to the event page where you just repeat exactly what you just said in the news release. So you're asking the person to say it, to read it twice. It's ridiculous. And search engines recognize that this is ridiculous, and they say that it's less relevant, and so you're less likely to index high in search engine results. So you want to do a web audit to see how much duplicate content you have on your site, how much is repeating across your site, both internally and from other sources. So don't copy and paste, don't make a habit of copying and pasting information and putting from other websites and putting it on your site, because this is going to create a duplicate content problem. Keep citations to a minimum. Instead of verbatim citations, it's best to summarize what is being cited and then provide a link saying, to see the exact citation, the exact wording, follow this link and go look at the original source. And again, there's tools you can find online that will go through your website and will find duplicate content and will tell you how much is duplicate content per page. So it'll break your website down per page and tell you the duplicate content. Again, look up these tools and Google them. I don't want to give you specifics. I don't want to be seen as advocating one or the other, and some of them, they disappear from time to time. So you also want to keep track of your dead links. The more dead links you have on your website, the worse it is from Google's perspective. It says, you're not someone who manages your site well, you don't maintain it, so it doesn't want to send traffic to you. So what is a dead link? A link is something, it's a link somewhere on your page or elsewhere that doesn't go anywhere anymore. So when we were talking earlier about URLs and how you want to, you want to change them, you change your URLs going forward. Don't go back to your old content and suddenly go, well, look at this URL is horrible. It's just a bunch of gibberish, or it's a number. I want to change that to a word because Stephen told me in Conquering Content that's to do. Don't change the stuff that's already been published. Because what happens is that anything that was pointing to that gibberish or numeric URL, say you've posted it in social media and said, to learn more, go here. Once you change that URL, what you've posted elsewhere is a dead link. It's not going anywhere. Someone will click on it and will come to your page and say, page not found. Why? Because you changed the URL. The information is still there, but you've changed the address. All right? It's like, think of it. If your house is at 50, Smith Street, and you physically move your house to 52 Smith Street, sure, your house is exactly the same. Nothing's changed in your house, but anybody who sends mail to 50 Smith Street is going to find an empty lot, right? You're right next door with the exact same house, but the mailman doesn't know that. So that's why you don't go changing your existing URLs. You change them moving forward. You course correct for the future. So you have to do a site audit to find how many dead links you have. And dead links don't just come from changing URLs. It's if you had, say, an event and it ran its course, it passed, and you're like, well, this is no longer relevant. I'm going to delete the event page. Well, what happens is every time you socialized it or put a call to action in your blog saying go to this event and register, is that those links still exist and can be followed. And not necessarily even followed by live people, live traffic. Bots will follow it. And for the most part, you don't like to have bots come to your page, but they exist. And bots are registered as traffic. So as bots come to your website and follow these dead links, Google takes notice. And also keep in mind that search engines like Google use bots themselves. They use bots to index your traffic, to index your content. So these bots coming from Google will just find dead link, dead link, dead link, dead link, and say, your website is no longer reliable, and you're less likely to show up high in search engine results. So your content audit requires you to find dead links. You should also have a sitemap on your website. It really helps with Google rankings, but it also makes going through your website easier. So that's a simple part of a content audit, is have a sitemap, but keep it up to date as well, so that as you produce content, your sitemap is also updated. Now, part of website audit is also the user experience, how they interact with your website. It's not just what the content is, it's how it's being presented. So how easy is it to find stuff on your website? You've got to do this. You've got to look into this. How is it navigated? Where's your menu located? Is your menu, and think, when you're doing this, a lot of people think about how it looks on the website, but they don't really put a lot of thought into how it's used. So if your audience is English speaking, you read from left to right. So what's really important should start in the top left and move right, and then down and to the right, and down and to the right. So for some people, the menu is important to have in the upper left. For some people, they want the content served first, so the menu's off to the right-hand side, or the menu's on the top. You have to think about this. So you have essentially there's two ways of looking at a website. There's the F pattern, which is, you think like an F, okay? You go across, back, down, across, okay. So you can actually, as you're looking at your website, visualize an overlay that's like an F with, continuous branches of the F, and see where your content and the rest of your website design intersects with those lines. Okay, so that's how people read. And this is proven. You'll find study. Look up F pattern. Again, Google F pattern and Z pattern, and you'll see all kinds of studies into how website design incorporates these two processes. Now the Z is, people read like across, down diagonally, across, down diagonally, across. So again, look at how that fits. It's very important for usability that your site be clean, clear, can't be cluttered. That disrupts navigation. So again, when you do your content audit, think about how people are looking at it as well. And a way to do this is you can run A/B testing. There's A/B testing services that when you're designing your site will push it forward in different ways. You know, they'll give you different options. So when one person visits your site, they get one option, the next person to visit gets another option, and so on and so forth. And then you gather this information through your analytics and the A/B testing software to tell you where your results are. How many people are sticking around to look through the site through option A, and how many people are getting there through option B, finding it hard to navigate, and are leaving quickly because they just don't know where they're going. Other things you want to find it is your www domain is resolved. So that means when someone goes www.csae.com or just csae.com, they're going to the same website. One pushes to the other. If it's not resolved, you find through a content audit, they could be going, if they go csae.com, they could go to the website, but www.csae.com leaves them to no page. Or, and I've seen this happen, what happens is that your server treats www, your website, and your website name without the www as two different websites. If you go to one, as far as you're concerned, you're changing one website and all changes get rolled out. But the traffic is going to the www and the non-www versions as two different websites. So that means everything on your website is considered duplicate content, because when Google indexes your website, it's looking at the www version and the non-www version, and it's seeing it as two different sites, and that means everything is duplicate. So you have to make sure your web address is resolved. You also want to make sure that your IP is canonical, which means when someone types in the IP assigned to your website, it brings up the website. It doesn't go to your hosts or whatever. So that's, again, this is a little bit technical, but very important for a content audit for your website to be working properly, because your content is going to take a hit if these things are not running on your website. As you can imagine, your content is going to vastly underperform if your website is not resolved and everything is considered duplicate. It's going to just knock your legs out from underneath you. You also want to look and see if you're using micro formats or rich snippets. Without getting into too much detail, these are ways of helping the user as well as search engines understand what your content is and how to interact with it. So I've tried not to get too technical or too in-depth, but I hope that I've explained sufficiently what a content audit is and how it is a mix of actual content and what is serving up your content, the framework around it being the website, as well as how you can get people involved with it. So a content audit, after hearing this, you should understand just how absolutely necessary it is to have a content audit, because now you should understand just how much can go wrong by assuming that, hey, I've got a website and so it must be running smoothly. Never assume that your website is running smoothly or that it's running at its peak efficiency. Always assume that the person who put it together did the least amount of work possible to deliver your website to you. It doesn't matter who's doing it, just always operate under that assumption that there is something wrong and you have to go and fix it. And the other thing about a content audit is understand that content trends and standards are also always changing. So you have to revisit your audit, I would say on an annual basis, redo it, just to see if the standards have changed and you're still operating efficiently, or if there's a change that you've done, or say by adding a new plugin, that you haven't actually caused the problem that's been missed for that year. So that's it for now. Content audits are extremely complex, extremely detailed and varied and intricate, but also extremely important. So I would hope that someone has some questions about content audits after seeing this. So if you do, leave them in the comments question or email them to me directly at steven@csae.com. That's Steven with a V, as I am Steven Trustrum, CSAE Content Manager. And this has been CSAE Conquering Content Audits. I hope you take what you've learned here and go to your website and go to your content, and it gives you something to think about.